let's make sure I'm following you. There are still operating leases. So what will happen to them under the new guidance?
Mike, that's really the significant change that we have in the new lease accounting. Operating leases, as we know it today, do not go on balance sheet. Operating leases, based on the new lease standard, go on balance sheet. Again, long-term operating leases. So we're not talking about renting a crane for 3 weeks. We're talking about a lease that is more than 12 months, and that could be a lease for, it could be a fleet of cars. It could be a lease for certain kinds of equipment. It could be a lease for property, rental property in a building. Whatever it ends up being, if it's an operating lease and not a finance lease, then that related asset and liability will go on balance sheet at the present value of the payments for the lease term, and then the subsequent measurement will be a straight line recognition pattern, which will be very similar to today's straight line recognition pattern for long-term operating leases. The difference will be that the asset and liability goes on balance sheet, and that is different from today's operating leases.
Okay, let's stay with lessee accounting. But let me ask you, what is the initial measurement for those assets and liabilities that are now going on the balance sheet?
Initial measurement is always going to be based on the present value of the payments required in the lease contract, and that will be for the entire lease term. So there's a calculation that has to be made based upon the discount rate associated with the lease, and that calculation is the starting point for all of the lease accounting going forward. So we're going to place an asset, a right-of-use asset. We're going to place a lease payment liability on the balance sheet for both finance and operating leases, and then they will subsequently be measured different because the pattern of expense will be different. A finance lease, it'll be front-loading at the cost because we're doing effective interest for the liability, and operating lease, we're doing a straight line recognition pattern throughout the lease term.